Hey guys, today I thought I would give some tips about how to analyse other artists' work. Now when I first went to college I really struggled with analysing other artists' work, and it was always the one thing dragging my overall mark down, and it was always the one thing teachers were coming back to me saying I needed to work on. So over the past 2 years I've definitely made big improvements on how I do this, and I thought I would share those tips with you today. Now of course these tips won't work for everyone, and each individual will have their own preferences when working and writing, so it's possible not all these tips will work for you. I'm just talking about what has worked best for me after lots of trial and error, so stick around to find out more. So the first thing I start by doing is doing some really basic research into the artist. This is important because it can give you a lot of background information on the actual piece that you're analysing. It can give a good insight into what was happening in the artist's life at the time they produced the work, and if this had any impact on why the piece turned out the way it did. Or it could also explain if there is a hidden meaning in the actual work. This could be anything from like political opinion to mental health struggles, things like that. But one thing that is really important to remember when you start writing your analysis is to not write a biography about the actual artist. So they might have had a super interesting life, they might have done amazing things and lived for years and years, but this is not what your teacher or whoever's marking your work needs to know. So you need to make sure you're only including the information that is relevant to the piece. So when it comes to actually writing about the art piece, start off by talking about what's actually in the image. This is so basic, but I've found that I've often just completely missed this, and that's partly why I got marked down so much. So talk about, is it a person in the picture, is it an object, is it a landscape, is it realistic or is it more abstract? Now this is so basic and everyone will just be screaming at me of how obvious it is, but I found myself often forgetting to do this, and I will just talk about what points I like. So it is important to make sure you do include this, just so that the person marking your work knows that this is definitely the piece of art you're talking about in your analysis. Now another thing to remember, it's also important to mention what kind of angle the photographer shot at if you are analysing a photograph. This is not really relevant if you're analysing like painting or something like that, but was it taken really close up, was it taken really far away, things like that, that this creates an effect on the audience. So if it's really close up, it shows a lot of little details which could be really important to you as the audience, so make sure you talk about that as well. For example, this is an image from the photographer Paul Reifer. I think I've pronounced his name right, I hope I have. He uses a lens ball to create a more abstract outcome when photographing landscapes. I've recently researched him quite in depth for my own project, so I thought this was a good example. Now he shoots very close up, also known as macro, and slightly off centre, which gives the audience more of an insight into the landscape he was photographing. Now with this particular photo I can also talk about the depth of field, which is another key thing to remember if you are analysing a photograph. So depth of field talks about basically how blurry the background is, how clear, things like that. And talk about also why you think the artist did this. This is another really important thing. Always circle it back to why you think the artist did this and what impact it has on you as the audience. The next really important thing to do is use a highlighter to mark the point that your eye was drawn to first when you first looked at the piece, and explain why this was the part of the image you were instantly drawn to. So for example, does this part contrast a lot with the rest of the image? Or is it really bright coloured? Is it surreal and abstract? This is key when you are analysing work, because most of the time an artist will deliberately try to create one point in the piece that is the main focal point for the audience, and this is the part they want everyone to notice first. So have they done it in a way that you look at this point and then your eye spirals around the rest of the image and you notice a lot more little details around it? Or is this point of the photo or piece showing the artist's meaning behind the whole piece? So this can link back to your initial research if you found out they had a more in-depth meaning behind the piece. Another really important thing to talk about in terms of technical side of photography and artwork is composition, which basically means how an image is arranged. Is there a main object in the piece? For example, is there a bowl of fruit? Is an apple really prominent at the front that catches your eye first? How is it arranged in the picture, and has the artist used other objects to frame it? Has the artist also used rule of 3? If you don't know what that is, it's like splitting the thing into, I think that's the right term. Most of the time the artist will deliberately place an object or a subject in a certain way to create an effect. So it is really important that you can recognise that, as this will also help you when you come to creating your own pieces of work. Talk about as well, if you are looking at an image, is it underexposed so it's really dark, or is it overexposed and it's super bright? As this all has a meaning and this all creates an atmosphere in a picture, so that's another good thing to talk about. You could also talk about what colours really stand out to you, and if they are more cool toned, and if that creates a more darker or tense atmosphere, or if they're really bright and vibrant and that makes you feel really happy and joyful. As again, if you are linking back to your initial research and you found out they were trying to create a really happy and uplifting piece, does the colours and the lighting back up their idea? That's another thing that's really good to mention. Another thing that I actually forgot to mention at the start of the video is that if you have found the artist you're researching through social media, for example Instagram, it's always worth DMing them and just basically saying that you're using their work in your research. It's asking permission essentially, especially if you're hoping to recreate this art style in your own style. I would always recommend doing this, as it's such a good way to explore what kind of styles really work with you, and you may find that you're really good at things like light painting or lens ball photography. It's always, you know, really worth exploring different styles that you've found through other photographers, and just by giving them a heads up and saying, look, I'm using your work as research and I'm hoping to recreate it, I will credit you. This prevents any nasty claims of you stealing work if you ever post your outcomes. But I've also found this is an amazing opportunity to actually learn a lot more. I've had really good experiences with a lot of photographers who give me tips about how I can best do this technique, and as well as editing techniques, so I get the really best outcome, and it has always been worthwhile. So I would say definitely just give them a heads up message. You never know, you might learn something really good. But overall, make sure you do always credit the original artist properly. Even if you don't end up recreating their work, it's just always do it. And finally, writing about your own opinion. It is so important to not use childish language when you come to writing your conclusions. So don't say, I like this picture because it looks nice. Like, this is not what anyone wants to know. They want to know how this piece affects you, what emotional response you got from the piece, if you think it's eye-catching or if it's striking, but make sure you always back up these points by referring to portions of the photo or the art piece that you're looking at. Also, don't be afraid to criticise the art. Nothing is ever perfect, and if you can point out bits that you don't like, for example if you think it's too dimly lit or if you don't like the effect used, say it, but don't ever be spiteful or nasty about it. Constructive criticism is the way to go. So don't ever just bash an artist for the sake of doing it, because it's, at the end of the day, it's not going to improve your own art style. So yeah, I hope these tips have been helpful. That's all I have today. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said at the start, these tips aren't going to be perfect for everyone, and I've probably missed out a lot. So if I have, I might do a follow-up video. I could also do a video about analysing your own work, as it's not too dissimilar, but there are a few points that I change when writing my own analysis about my own work, so that might be something you guys are interested in. If it is, leave a like and a comment so I know that you want that. Make sure you subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I'll hopefully see you in the next one. Bye!